So today I want to talk about how Russia has framed the attack on the Kerch Bridge in July. As you know, the Ukrainians use these seaborne drones. They're called Sea Babies, and they're going to bring out a commentator to talk about it. When they do bring out the commentator, I want you to listen for a couple of things. She's going to go beyond just to talk about the Kerch Bridge. But listen, it's the enormous amount of Russian talking points that they cover. It's absolutely fascinating how many talking points they can cram in. It's like you could play a game and ring a bell every time that they do. Now I'll ring one bell for just regular talking points, and I'll make this other sound so that you can hear when they say it's only a distraction. It's only a distraction. It's only a distraction. And I'm doing that so I can flag your attention of their chief talking point, at least while they're talking about the Black Sea, about how this is just a distraction. And then also listen for how the commentator, it's almost like a projection, like Freudian projection thing. How much what she's saying is what the Russians are doing. Okay, so who's the commentator that she's going to bring out? It's going to bring out this lady named Sonia van den Ende. And Sonia, let's just give her a little bit of the background. Sonia van den Ende is an independent journalist. Okay, they love using the term independent journalist, like Richard Medhurst uses that term. That means he doesn't work for anyone. It means freelance because nobody really wants them to be on, working for them. Generally speaking, not necessarily her. Maybe she can get a real job. And columnist, while more often she's seen as a pro-Russian conspiracy theorist, she was recruited to report from Ukraine in March 2022 and has taken part in press tours organized by the Russian army in the occupied Ukrainian territory. So what do you think her bent's going to be? Before the invasion of Ukraine, Sonia van den Ende was reporting from Syria. She has accused the U.S. and Israel of mass murder in Syria. She's praised Putin for his help in defending the Syrian people. She was also an individual observer at the 2022 pseudo-referendum for the formal annexation of occupied territories of Luhansk in Russia. This was an attempt of Russia to say, see, we had journalists there to see how fair it was. So, yeah. That's who we're dealing with. Okay, with that being said, let's see what they have to say, and I'll pipe in periodically to give some commentary. So here we go.
Ukraine has admitted to blowing up the Crimean Bridge with an experimental drone it calls a Sea Baby, with the head of the nation's security service claiming it's a unique invention of Kiev's. This footage shows the strike on the bridge last month, which used a sea drone carrying some 850 kilograms of explosives. A wife and a husband fell victim to the attack, leaving their teenage daughter orphaned. The head of Ukraine's security service threatened that more similar attacks were on the way.
Okay, 30 seconds in, and they've told only facts. So good on RT so far, but it's going to go downhill from here.
And to discuss this in depth, we now cross live in studio to independent Dutch journalist Sonia van den Ende. Welcome, Sonia. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
And so you just returned from the Donbass. What do you...
Okay, so that should be a flag right there. If she's just returning from the Donbass, she's going to be giving all the Donbass perspective of things, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily bad. Let's just hear what she has to say.
You make of Ukraine's finally taking responsibility for this attack on the Crimean Bridge after denying it so many times?
Well,
but they didn't deny it this last time, right? This last time they were just quiet. So... I mean, not this last time with missiles, but with the seaborne attack in July, they didn't deny it. They just were quiet.
Finally, they admitted that they actually are behind all these attacks because they do many. They did some in Moscow, of course, and the Crimea, they do that, I think, now on a nearly weekly or 2-weekly basis. So I think they finally admit, and this is what we actually, I think a lot of people already know what they are doing. And it's very peculiar.
I don't think it's a surprise to anybody in the world that Ukraine wants to strike at Russia, and either directly or indirectly, they're doing it. So,
because in January, there were these NAFO fellows who were raising some money for...
If you couldn't hear that, she was talking about NAFO, N-A-F-O, fellas.
New drone.
Money.
So I think this new drone is now the Sea Baby. They called it the Raccoon Revenge or something. So, I mean, this is, so they can say, oh no, it's not from not the government. It's from, we didn't make this drone, but this drone was made by a fundraising from people. This is what they actually say.
So I looked it up, and the NAFO fellas, the NAFO Fleet Part 2, the Flying Fellas Squadron, they are raising money for drones. But whether they're raising money for actual sea baby drones, that I haven't quite found yet. There are some interesting memes like this with the sea babies on them with NAFO fellas, but I don't know how true what she said is, and I'll take it with a grain of salt. But if they did do that, that's pretty astounding. And NAFO, I mean, that's just hats off if you've been able to do that.
They didn't take responsibility, but now at last they do.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they're now finally taking responsibility where before they refused to admit any sort of accountability?
Well, I think they, of course, are losing on the battlefield. And
there we go with the Russian talking points. They're losing on the battlefield, and so there's that. Now, there is some truth to that in a sense, and I've talked about that before in other videos. This one is completely different. This is Ukraine's third counteroffensive strategy. That's right. They're doing what they're doing with the drones and attacking to give themselves space so that they can do the counteroffensive on the battlefield itself. They have to continue to seize the momentum, and that's the way that they're doing that. So, okay, let's get back to it.
Clients like the US and the Western states are not very happy because now we can finally read in the media that, okay, Ukraine might lose, maybe
another talking point.
The counteroffensive. So it will take a lot of time. Maybe they even will lose territory. So now they can focus on Crimea. And they can also say now, okay, we take responsibility. See what we are doing now. We are trying to fight back. But of course, it's not fighting. It's terrorism.
Okay, so she's making the assertion that it's terrorism. But if that's terrorism, what is everything else that the Russians are doing? See, the Russians define terrorism like they define Nazi. A Nazi is anyone who opposes Russia, and a terrorist is anyone who does anything bad to the Russians militarily. It doesn't matter that they're in a war with the Ukrainians, regardless of the language of special military operation that they use. The Ukrainians have every right to fight back. And that's not terrorism. Terrorism would be going after individuals somewhere to blow something up just to create a terroristic attack. This is actually trying to destroy a line of communication, which is, they can move men and material over it, but it's called a line of communication, as I understand in the military, a supply line. That's different than a terrorist attack.
Yes, and we know that Ukraine is getting heavy support from the West, particularly the U.S. And so what is your take on the claims that they had these sea drones without outside assistance?
Well, it's what I said. There was somehow an article in January, and it was from these NAFO fellows. The NAFO fellows are part of NATO. They are the young ones, and they were fundraising to design new drones. And these drones were, the fundraising was from private people, they said. So the Ukrainian government has not any responsibility, and also not the West. So, but actually, NAFO fellows are NATO. So it's all connected.
And how significant do you think that these drones will actually be for the current conflict? Do you think this is actually something that will win any sort of advantage, or do you think this is more of like a chess pup?
Well, I think it's a distraction. What I said from the will.
Okay, so two things. So, one, NAFO is NATO is factually incorrect, but I get what she's trying to say. She's trying to draw that they're both fighting on the same thing. But they're not the same. And then, is it a distraction? Yes, it's a distraction. It is, but it's more than a distraction. It is something where the battlefield has shifted down into the Black Sea because they're still trying to work out what's going on the actual battlefield. So the Ukrainians have expanded the battlefield line, and they're actually making progress in the Black Sea.
What's happening on the battlefield, they are losing. They are losing, I think, everywhere. Sometimes they say, oh, we gained 3 kilometers of land, but yeah, this is not true. So, I mean, actually, they have been gaining very small increments of land over the space of the battlefield. But again, that's just Russian talking points. Only a distraction, like the drones we see on Moscow and of course Crimea. It's very important for Ukraine to say we want Crimea back. So this is continuously droned. But it's not significant for the real battlefield.
I bet you that they do feel that the Kerch Bridge is significant, and they're saying it's not. It's just a distraction, just a distraction, just a distraction. It is. And when it's finally disabled, they're going to go absolutely out of their minds when it's finally disabled for real.
This is a distraction, then why so much focus on the Crimean Peninsula if, this is not something that realistically they are going to get back?
Well, I think Zelensky said a few months ago back that he wants to conquer Crimea back to be Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And of course, the referendum was there last September, so back to Russia, because the majority of the people...
And a referendum at gunpoint, that's really a solid way of doing it. And the first referendum had such high rates, I talked about this before, high rates of voting that it's laughable that any democracy would see anything like that. So, and while they're occupied, the rest of the world doesn't recognize this for a reason.
In Crimea are Russian-speaking people, Russian ethnic people. So this is very, it's like a trophy. It would be for Ukraine, which will not happen.
Right. It's so unrealistic. And NATO's chief of staff has also suggested that Ukraine may get NATO membership in exchange for maybe giving some territories to Russia. Do you think this is actually...
Okay, so this was just out yesterday or the day before, where his assistant chief of staff made some comment of one of the scenarios that could play out, and it was not thought through, was not trying to make an official statement. This is the way that we're going to do this, and they walked it back.
Something that these Western states are prepared to do, or do you think they're just sort of dangling this carrot on Ukraine?
I think so, because, this is what they do all the time. They think, if you do this, then we give you this. But all the people, all the countries in NATO are already saying that Ukraine cannot be part of NATO, because usually it takes a lot of time to be part of NATO, like being part of the European Union. So I think it's a distraction again from Western states to the real issue that Ukraine is losing. The counteroffensive, it's not going well.
Yeah, you say the counteroffensive isn't going well, and so much independent media has been reporting that. But Western media seems to be in denial. Do you think that maybe NATO is shifting a bit? Do you think they're going weary or a little bit apprehensive about...
Western media is in denial. That's what she said. Really? So Western free press that can go and verify things with themselves on their own, they're in denial. Now, they are more and more saying, look, the counteroffensive just isn't doing that great. They're not making that kind of ground. Why aren't they making that kind of ground? Turns out they don't have airplanes or air support or whatever it is that they need, but they're not in denial. They're just not getting the results that they were hoping for.
The status of the conflict?
Yes, sure, because we also now hear that, NATO is preparing to put troops at the Belarusian border, the Polish border. Poland just had its military parade a few days ago, so it's all, heating up. This is what they maybe want, heating up the conflict, we can say. But I don't think, because I also heard that they want to put 300,000 extra soldiers, but this is not realistic because it will take a few years.
Do you think that after everything that's happened, if Ukraine were to enter NATO, would it even be a benefit to them at that point?
I don't think so, because...
Of course it would. What?
All Western countries have put so much weapons in Ukraine. And what can Ukraine offer to them? Not security. This is what NATO always pretending.
Again, that's Russian talking points. They don't want Ukraine to join NATO, but Ukraine will have the most battle-tested experience of any country within NATO when this is over. Ukraine will be versatile with both Western and Soviet weapons. Ukraine is still right there on the border of the aggressive country that is Russia. I can't understand why she would say this. Well, I do understand it. I mean, she's coming from the Russian perspective, and she doesn't want that to happen.
We want security because we are not an attacking force. We are just a defending force, a security. So it will not be of any benefit because, Ukraine, it's the country, it's, the eastern part is Russia. And the western part, most likely, Poland has some aspirations to put it with Poland, but it will be done.
This is this weird Russian talking point. The eastern part of Ukraine is really Russia, okay? And that's what she's saying. And so now it's being captured, and Russia is claiming it. And the western part, Poland really wants it. Poland doesn't want it. And you keep seeing these maps of that they try to create to make it look like, well, this is the way that Ukraine will be carved up and what the map will look like later on. No, that's anyway.
Not of a benefit, not at all.
Well, looking at Moscow now, do you think they would be likely to accept any sort of peace deal that would entitle to allowing Ukraine to enter NATO, or do you think they would reject such a assertion?
Yes, they would, because
right, and that's why Russia has to be absolutely beaten, because they're not going to accept it because they realize that that's bad for them. And it didn't have to go this way. If they wanted Ukraine in their orbit, they could have wooed them rather than attack them.
So the government in Russia always said that Ukraine could not be part of NATO because it's the border of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, this is something unrealistically.
And for Ukrainians, they can't not be part of NATO because if they don't, then Russia attacks and steals their oblast. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I've had enough. You've had enough. So I hope this is informative of the way that things are being projected on RT. Okay, that's all that I have. This is a real glimpse of what Russia propaganda, Russian state media wants you to see. Thank you for your time, your attention, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.